The blind black singer bumped into a Korean Mafia boss. Everyone froze when he stepped back. What could make a single unexpected moment leave everyone frozen? Why would one simple step back become the moment no one could forget? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy emotional stories filled with unforgettable twists and powerful human moments, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Thank you for being here and for your continued support, it truly means a lot. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, if you witnessed a moment like the one in today's title, what would your first reaction be? Now, settle in, and let's discover how one extraordinary encounter set the stage for a story no one saw coming. Some people command respect with fear, while others earn it without ever seeing the faces around them, and on one ordinary afternoon in downtown Seattle, those two worlds collided in a way no one present would ever forget. The autumn air carried the scent of roasted coffee and fresh rain as people hurried along Pike Street, their footsteps blending with distant traffic and the faint melody floating above the crowd. The voice belonged to Jasmine Brooks, a blind black singer whose warm, soulful performance had become part of the city's heartbeat. Every morning before sunrise, she measured the familiar sidewalks with her white cane, counting every curb, every storefront, every echo bouncing from brick walls she had never seen. She did not perform for sympathy. She sang because music was the only place where darkness had never taken anything away from her. A weathered guitar rested against her shoulder, and a small speaker amplified every note just enough for strangers to pause before continuing with lives that rarely slowed down. Some dropped $1 into the open case at her feet. Others smiled quietly before disappearing into the crowd. Jasmine thanked every single person with the same gentle sincerity, never knowing who had stayed to listen or who had already walked away. Only her ears painted the world around her, transforming footsteps into personalities and silence into stories. Less than 50 yards away, an entirely different rhythm moved through the city. Ethan Kong stepped from a black luxury SUV with the effortless calm of someone who never needed to announce his arrival. His tailored charcoal coat fit perfectly against broad shoulders, while polished dress shoes barely made a sound on the damp sidewalk. To most people passing by, he looked like another successful businessman. Only the men surrounding him understood the weight carried by every quiet glance he gave. They matched his pace without speaking, always a respectful distance behind, watching every direction at once while Ethan seemed interested in nothing more than the city itself. He had built a reputation that caused powerful executives to measure every word before speaking to him, yet he rarely raised his voice. His silence had become more influential than other people's arguments. As the group approached the corner where Jasmine continued singing, the morning crowd naturally shifted to make room. Office workers recognized the expensive convoy before recognizing the man walking at its center. Some instinctively stepped aside. Others simply followed the movement without understanding why. Jasmine, unaware of every curious glance surrounding her, finished the final chorus of her song before folding her microphone stand with practiced precision. She reached for her guitar case, balanced it carefully over one shoulder, tapped her cane forward, and began crossing the sidewalk exactly as she had hundreds of times before. Then, in a single unexpected heartbeat, the tip of her cane caught the edge of an uneven paving stone. Her balance shifted just enough for her shoulder to brush gently against Ethan Kong. The city seemed to stop breathing. Conversations vanished. Footsteps halted. Even the wind felt strangely quiet. Every pair of eyes locked onto the two strangers standing inches apart. No one expected what happened next. Ethan did not recoil. He did not speak. Instead, with complete composure, the Korean Mafia boss slowly stepped backward, creating space for the blind singer before anyone else could move, and in that silent gesture, an entire street forgot how to breathe. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Ethan Kong remained exactly where he had stepped back, his expression calm, almost unreadable, while the members of his security team exchanged uncertain glances they had never imagined sharing. They had spent years learning his habits, anticipating every decision before he spoke, but this moment fit none of the patterns they knew. One of the men instinctively shifted forward, prepared to guide the singer away before the growing crowd became a problem, but Ethan raised one quiet hand without taking his eyes off the young woman. The simple gesture stopped everyone. Jasmine, completely unaware of the invisible wave of tension surrounding her, tightened her grip on the handle of her white cane. Her breathing remained steady despite the unexpected collision. "I am so sorry," she said softly, her voice warm with genuine concern. "I did not realize someone was standing so close." There was no panic in her tone, no trembling apology born from fear, only the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to navigating a world that often refused to slow down for her. Ethan noticed that immediately. Most people apologized because they feared consequences. Jasmine apologized because kindness had become part of who she was. She tilted her head ever so slightly, listening to the silence around her. "Is everyone all right?" she asked with a faint smile. It suddenly became very quiet. A few people lowered their eyes, almost embarrassed that she had sensed what none of them had spoken aloud. Ethan answered before anyone else could. "Yes," he replied in a measured voice. "Everyone is fine." His words carried neither authority nor impatience, only reassurance. Jasmine smiled a little wider. "That is good to hear. Thank you." She adjusted the guitar strap on her shoulder and lightly tapped the sidewalk ahead with her cane, searching for the familiar rhythm of the pavement before taking another careful step. Ethan watched the precise movements with unexpected curiosity. She counted each tap without hesitation, measuring distance through sound rather than sight. Every motion had been practiced thousands of times until confidence replaced uncertainty. She did not ask anyone to lead her. She did not wait for assistance. Independence had become her language long before this morning. As she continued walking, a small boy broke free from his mother's hand and hurried toward the open guitar case she had accidentally left behind near the performance spot. The child quietly picked up 2 folded dollar bills that had slipped onto the sidewalk and ran after her. "Miss," he called. Jasmine stopped immediately, turning toward the sound of the young voice. "I think these belong to you," the boy said proudly as he placed the money into her hand. Her face brightened with sincere gratitude. "Thank you so much," she replied. "You have a very honest heart." The boy smiled so broadly that his mother laughed, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. Ethan noticed something else then. Jasmine reached into her pocket, found a small wrapped piece of peppermint candy, and offered it to the child. "For helping me," she said. "Kindness deserves kindness." The little boy accepted it as though he had received something priceless. Ethan found himself watching the exchange longer than he intended. No cameras surrounded them. No audience applauded. There was nothing to gain from such a simple act except the quiet satisfaction of making another person smile. Around them, the city slowly began moving again, conversations returning one by one, yet Ethan remained strangely still. For reasons he could not explain, the sound of Jasmine's voice lingered in his thoughts long after she disappeared into the flow of pedestrians, leaving behind nothing except a fading melody, the soft tap of her white cane against the sidewalk, and a silence inside him that somehow felt entirely new. That evening, Seattle shimmered beneath a curtain of mist as city lights reflected across rain-darkened streets, but Ethan Kong found himself unusually distracted. Inside the top floor of a quiet office overlooking Elliott Bay, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline while polished walnut shelves and soft amber lighting created an atmosphere of controlled elegance. Normally, this was where every important decision of his day reached its conclusion. Tonight, however, a single memory refused to leave. It was not the accidental collision. It was not the surprised expressions of strangers. It was the calm voice of a woman who had apologized without fear and thanked a child with genuine joy over 2 simple dollar bills. Ethan rested his untouched cup of coffee on the edge of his desk. One of his senior advisors noticed the silence before carefully speaking. "You have not reviewed the final reports, sir." Ethan gave a slight nod without looking away from the city below. "They can wait until tomorrow." The answer surprised everyone in the room. He had never delayed work without reason. As the advisors quietly excused themselves, only Daniel Cho, his longtime executive assistant, remained. Daniel had worked beside Ethan for nearly 12 years and understood that silence often revealed more than conversation. After a respectful pause, he finally asked, "Are you thinking about the singer?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the window, watching ferries glide slowly across the water. "Find out who she is," he said at last. Daniel looked slightly confused. "You mean the woman from this morning?" Ethan nodded once. "Nothing invasive. I do not want her disturbed. I only want to know her name and whether she is safe." Daniel quietly accepted the instruction. It was an unusual request. Ethan had never shown personal interest in a stranger before. Less than an hour later, a modest file rested on Ethan's desk. There was very little inside. Jasmine Brooks. 30 years old. Blind since childhood because of a rare medical condition. No family living nearby. She rented a small apartment in Seattle's Central District. Every weekday she performed at different locations throughout downtown, and every Tuesday evening she volunteered at a neighborhood community center, teaching children simple vocal exercises and confidence through music. Ethan paused as he reached the final page. There was no mention of awards, viral videos, wealthy sponsors, or remarkable achievements. Her entire life fit into a few ordinary paragraphs. Yet something about that simplicity carried unexpected weight. Daniel remained quietly nearby. "There is one more detail," he said. Ethan looked up. "She refuses private donations larger than $100. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Daniel continued, "According to the community center director, she tells everyone the same thing. She says generosity should never become dependency because dignity grows stronger when people can still stand on their own." The room became silent again. Ethan slowly closed the folder, his fingers resting on its worn edge. Those words echoed with surprising force. He had spent years surrounded by people asking for favors, influence, opportunities, or protection. Yet the woman who owned almost nothing had quietly built her life around preserving something many wealthy people eventually lost. Dignity. Across the city, Jasmine unlocked the door to her small apartment with practiced confidence. The familiar scent of lavender greeted her as she placed her guitar carefully beside the sofa. She smiled softly after hearing a cheerful bark from her aging rescue dog, Oliver, who immediately rested his head against her knee. Jasmine laughed, knelt beside him, and whispered, "We had an interesting day today, did we not?" Oliver wagged his tail while she reached for the old piano near the window, gently pressing a few notes before humming a melody that had come to her during the walk home. She had no idea that somewhere across the city, the quiet stranger she had accidentally met was listening to the same memory from an entirely different world. The following Tuesday arrived beneath a pale gray sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of saltwater through the streets as downtown Seattle settled into another busy afternoon. Inside the Jefferson Community Center, laughter echoed through a modest music room where a dozen children sat in a loose circle waiting for Jasmine Brooks to begin their weekly lesson. The walls were decorated with colorful drawings, handwritten song lyrics, and photographs from neighborhood events collected over many years. Jasmine stood beside an upright piano whose finish had faded with age, her fingertips gently brushing across the worn keys before she smiled toward the sound of eager voices. "Today," she said warmly, "we are not learning how to sing louder. We are learning how to listen better." The children exchanged puzzled looks before one little girl raised her hand. "How do you listen better?" Jasmine laughed softly. "You listen with more than your ears. You listen with your heart. Every person has a song, even when they are not singing." The room became wonderfully quiet as every child leaned closer. Ethan Kong entered the building through a side hallway several minutes later wearing a simple navy jacket instead of his usual tailored overcoat. Only Daniel Cho accompanied him, remaining several steps behind to avoid drawing attention. Ethan had donated to community organizations for years without attending public events, but today he had asked to visit without announcing his arrival. The center director recognized him immediately yet honored his request for privacy, quietly guiding the two men toward the music room before stepping away. Through the partially open doorway, Ethan watched Jasmine lead the children through breathing exercises. She never spoke down to them. She never rushed anyone who struggled. One young boy repeatedly missed the notes, growing visibly frustrated before lowering his head. Jasmine walked toward him, guided only by the sound of his breathing. She knelt beside him with a reassuring smile. "Do you know what makes a choir beautiful?" she asked. The boy shrugged. "Everyone sings perfectly?" Jasmine gently shook her head. "No. Everyone keeps singing together, even after making mistakes." The boy smiled shyly. Moments later he joined the group again, this time with renewed confidence. Ethan noticed something remarkable. Every child looked at Jasmine as though she could somehow see each of them more clearly than anyone else ever had. She remembered every voice, every laugh, every hesitation without needing to see a single face. Daniel quietly observed Ethan instead. He recognized the thoughtful expression that rarely appeared outside private moments. "She teaches courage," Daniel whispered. Ethan remained silent. His attention drifted toward an old framed photograph hanging near the piano. It showed the community center more than 20 years earlier. Children filled the room, smiling beside volunteers who had long since moved away. Ethan stared at it longer than expected. Without warning, a distant memory surfaced. He remembered sitting silently as a little boy beside his grandmother while she practiced traditional songs in a small church outside Seoul. She had often told him that the strongest voices belonged to people who carried kindness through difficult days. He had not thought about those afternoons in decades. The memory arrived with unexpected clarity, carried not by a familiar place but by the gentle patience of a woman who had unknowingly reminded him of everything life had slowly buried beneath responsibility and success. As the lesson ended, every child gathered around Jasmine for a group farewell before racing toward waiting parents. She remained behind to straighten the chairs, humming quietly while folding sheet music into careful stacks. Ethan stood motionless outside the doorway, realizing he had spent nearly an hour watching someone whose greatest influence came not from power, wealth, or reputation, but from the simple decision to help others believe they were worth hearing. After the last child disappeared down the hallway, the building settled into a peaceful quiet broken only by the distant hum of the heating system and the soft rustle of sheet music being returned to a weathered cabinet. Jasmine Brooks carefully locked the piano lid before reaching for her white cane. She believed she was alone until she heard two slow footsteps approaching from the doorway. They were measured, confident, and strangely familiar. She turned her head slightly toward the sound. "Someone is still here," she said with a gentle smile. Ethan Kong stepped into the room without speaking immediately. For the first time in many years, he found himself searching for the right words instead of expecting them to arrive naturally. "I hope I am not interrupting," he finally said. Jasmine recognized the calm voice almost instantly. "You are the gentleman from downtown," she replied. "The one I accidentally bumped into." A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face before he realized it. "Yes," he answered. "We have already met once." Jasmine laughed softly. "Then I suppose today counts as a pleasant coincidence." Ethan glanced around the nearly empty room before looking back toward her. "I did not know you taught children." She rested one hand lightly on the back of a chair. "Music helped me find confidence when I was young. Someone gave that gift to me, so I try to pass it along." Ethan studied her expression. She spoke with complete sincerity, never attempting to impress anyone. There was no performance now, no audience waiting to applaud. This was simply who she was. "The children trust you," he observed. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. Children know when they are being heard. Adults often forget that feeling. Her words settled quietly between them. Ethan realized he could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to him without expecting something in return. Before he could respond, the community center director entered carrying a small cardboard box filled with donated music books. "Miss Brooks, these arrived this morning," she said apologetically. I wish we had enough copies for every child, but this was all the program could afford. Jasmine ran her fingertips gently across the worn covers before smiling. Then we will simply learn to share. The director sighed. You always make limited resources sound easy. Jasmine shook her head. Not easy. Just possible. Ethan noticed several of the books had loose pages held together with transparent tape. Others were missing covers entirely. Yet Jasmine accepted them with the same gratitude someone else might show for an expensive gift. After the director left, Ethan quietly asked, "Do you ever wish for more?" Jasmine tilted her head as though considering the question carefully. Of course, she admitted. I wish every child here could have their own instrument. I wish nobody felt alone. I wish people had more reasons to believe in themselves. She paused before adding with a peaceful smile, but wishing is different from complaining. Complaining changes very little. Ethan looked toward the old piano standing silently beside them. He remembered boardrooms filled with conversations about investments worth millions of dollars, yet somehow this modest room felt richer than many places he visited every week. Jasmine reached for her guitar case and adjusted it over her shoulder. Thank you for stopping by, she said warmly. I still do not know your name. Ethan hesitated for the briefest moment. Very few people ever met him without already knowing exactly who he was. My name is Ethan, he replied simply. Jasmine extended her hand without hesitation. He looked at it for a second before gently shaking it. Her handshake was steady, warm, and completely free of intimidation or expectation. She smiled. It is nice to meet you properly, Ethan. As he released her hand, Ethan realized something that unsettled him in the most unexpected way. Jasmine Brooks had spoken to him exactly as she would have spoken to any other stranger, and for the first time in years, he found himself deeply grateful that she had no idea who he was. The days that followed unfolded with quiet consistency, yet something had begun to change beneath the surface of both their lives. Every Thursday afternoon, Jasmine Brooks returned to the same corner near Pike Place Market, where the sound of passing ferries mixed with conversations, footsteps, and the distant cry of seagulls circling Elliott Bay. She never chose the location because it attracted generous crowds. She chose it because the acoustics allowed every note to travel naturally through the open air. She believed music deserved room to breathe. Across the street, Ethan Kong sat inside a discreet corner booth at a small coffee shop whose windows overlooked the plaza. A newspaper rested unopened beside his untouched espresso. Daniel Cho glanced at the cup before looking back toward his employer. It is getting cold again, he observed quietly. Ethan barely acknowledged the comment. His attention remained fixed on the familiar melody drifting through the afternoon air. Jasmine was singing the same hymn she had hummed while organizing music books at the community center, but somehow each performance carried subtle differences, shaped by the mood of the day rather than perfect repetition. Ethan finally spoke without taking his eyes from the window. She never performs the same song exactly the same way twice. Daniel smiled faintly. Most people would never notice. Ethan answered almost absent-mindedly. Most people are listening to the words. She listens to the people. At that very moment, an elderly man approached Jasmine with hesitant footsteps. His breathing sounded strained, and he apologized for interrupting before admitting that he had forgotten his wallet after ordering lunch from a nearby food cart. Before he could finish explaining, Jasmine quietly reached into the small pouch attached to her guitar case and handed him enough cash to cover the meal. The old man immediately protested. I cannot take your money. You earn this one song at a time. Jasmine simply smiled. Then perhaps one day you will help someone else. That way it keeps traveling. The man thanked her repeatedly before walking away with tears quietly filling his eyes. Daniel had witnessed the entire exchange through the cafe window. She gives away money she probably needs herself, he murmured. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. No, he finally replied. She gives away hope because she believes there will always be enough. The words surprised even him. Across the plaza, a teenage violin player arrived carrying a worn instrument case. The young musician hesitated after noticing Jasmine already performing nearby and began turning away, clearly worried about competing for listeners. Jasmine heard the faint scrape of the violin case against the sidewalk. "Excuse me," she called gently. "Would you like to play together?" The teenager froze in surprise. "You mean with you?" Jasmine nodded toward the sound of his voice. "There is enough music for both of us." Within minutes, violin and voice blended into a harmony so effortless that pedestrians naturally slowed to listen. More people gathered than either performer usually attracted alone. Some applauded. Others quietly recorded short videos before continuing on their way. When the final note faded, Jasmine divided every dollar collected inside the guitar case into 2 equal stacks without counting who had contributed more. The teenager stared in disbelief. "But everyone came because of your singing," he insisted. Jasmine shook her head gently. "No. They stayed because we shared the song." From his seat inside the cafe, Ethan watched the young violinist walk away smiling with renewed confidence, carrying not only half the earnings but something far more valuable. Ethan slowly stood, leaving his untouched coffee behind. He realized that every time Jasmine entered a room, a classroom, or even a busy sidewalk, people somehow left feeling larger than when they arrived, and for a man who had spent years measuring success through influence and control, that quiet gift had become impossible to ignore. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in soft clouds that filtered the sunlight into a gentle silver glow across Seattle. The weekly community music showcase transformed the small neighborhood square into a place filled with folding chairs, local artists, families carrying homemade snacks, and children chasing one another across the grass. Jasmine Brooks had volunteered to open the event, believing that the first song should always welcome every heart before entertaining every ear. She arrived early with Oliver walking calmly beside her, her white cane tapping a familiar rhythm along the paved path leading to the temporary stage. Volunteers greeted her warmly, helping position a microphone stand while she carefully tuned her guitar by ear. Not far away, a polished black sedan rolled quietly into a nearby parking area. Ethan Kong stepped out wearing a simple gray sweater beneath a dark jacket, blending easily into the weekend crowd. Daniel Cho followed several steps behind, carrying nothing more noticeable than 2 cups of coffee. "You did not tell the organizers you were coming," Daniel observed. Ethan shook his head. "Today belongs to the community, not to me." They found seats near the back where they could listen without attracting attention. As the showcase began, Jasmine welcomed everyone with the same calm warmth she offered each child in her classroom. Her voice drifted through the park with effortless grace, and conversations gradually faded until only music remained. People smiled at strangers. Children stopped running long enough to listen. Even passing joggers slowed their pace before continuing. When the final note settled into the quiet morning air, applause spread naturally through the audience. Then the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage holding a clipboard. "Before our next performance," he announced, "we would like to recognize someone who has spent years serving this neighborhood." Jasmine looked slightly confused when she heard her own name. She had not expected any recognition. The organizer invited her back to center stage and handed her a framed certificate thanking her for hundreds of volunteer hours teaching children free of charge. Jasmine accepted it with both hands, smiling modestly. "This belongs to every child who believed they could sing," she said softly into the microphone. "I only helped them hear what was already inside them." The audience applauded again, louder this time. Near the front of the crowd, a representative from a private entertainment company watched the celebration with narrowed eyes. His organization had recently offered Jasmine a contract that promised larger audiences and greater income, but it also required her to stop volunteering and perform exclusively at commercial venues. She had politely declined without hesitation. The representative quietly approached the stage after the applause ended. "Miss Brooks," he said with practiced professionalism, "you are wasting remarkable talent in places like this. Think about everything you could gain if you accepted our proposal." Jasmine answered kindly but firmly. Success that asks me to abandon people who helped me grow is too expensive for me. Several nearby volunteers overheard the exchange and fell silent. The man forced a courteous smile before walking away, clearly disappointed that another attempt had failed. Ethan had listened to every word from the back row. He did not interfere. He simply watched Jasmine step away from the spotlight to congratulate the next performer as though the award had never happened. She carried the framed certificate herself instead of asking anyone else to hold it, then quietly offered the front row seat reserved for her to an elderly woman who arrived late with a walking cane. Daniel glanced toward Ethan. She keeps choosing others over herself. Ethan looked across the park where Jasmine laughed with the children gathering around the stage. No, he said quietly. She has already chosen who she wants to be, and every decision simply follows that choice. The following week, an unexpected announcement spread quietly through the neighborhood. The Jefferson Community Center had received notice that one of its oldest music classrooms would soon close unless enough funding could be secured before the end of the month. The building itself would remain open, but the music program that had inspired generations of children stood on uncertain ground. Volunteers gathered one evening around a folding table, studying modest budgets and searching for solutions that never seemed large enough. Jasmine Brooks listened carefully as every idea was discussed. Someone suggested charging tuition. Another proposed reducing the number of classes. A third recommended canceling the program until additional support appeared. Jasmine waited until the room became quiet before speaking. If we close the classroom, she said gently, some children will believe music is only for people who can afford it. I cannot let them believe that. Her words lingered in the room long after she finished. The director smiled sadly. Neither can I, Jasmine. I simply do not know how to keep the doors open. Jasmine reached into her guitar case and quietly removed the framed certificate she had received at the community showcase. Please auction this during the fundraiser, she offered. The director looked startled. That belongs to you. Jasmine shook her head. Recognition only matters if it helps someone else. Across town, Daniel Cho entered Ethan Kang's office carrying a thin folder he had not expected to prepare. The community center is struggling, he explained. Their music program may close within a few weeks. Ethan looked up immediately. Why? Rising operating costs. Fewer grants this year. They have organized a neighborhood fundraiser, but it may not be enough. Ethan closed the report without another question. He walked toward the window overlooking the harbor, watching the evening lights shimmer across Elliott Bay. Several quiet moments passed before he finally spoke. Purchase the building. Daniel blinked in surprise. Quietly? Ethan nodded. Transfer ownership to a charitable foundation. Keep the current leadership. Increase the music budget. Replace every instrument that needs repair. Modernize the classrooms. No publicity. No announcement connected to my name. Daniel smiled knowingly. And Miss Brooks? Ethan turned slightly. She must never feel that someone rescued her work. She has already built something extraordinary. We are only making sure nobody tears it down. Less than 2 weeks later, construction crews arrived at the community center carrying new pianos, music stands, recording equipment, and shelves filled with fresh instructional books. The director stood speechless as official documents confirmed that every operating expense for the music program had been secured for the foreseeable future through an anonymous educational foundation. Volunteers embraced one another with joyful disbelief. Parents cried quietly in the hallway. Children clapped excitedly as workers rolled beautifully restored instruments into classrooms that had once relied on decades-old equipment. Jasmine gently rested her fingertips across the polished keys of a new grand piano, smiling as its first notes filled the room with warm, resonant sound. Someone believes in these children, she whispered. The director nodded through grateful tears. Someone certainly does. Standing outside across the street, Ethan watched through the building's front windows as laughter echoed from room to room. He did not step inside. He did not ask for thanks. He simply listened as dozens of young voices sang together with renewed confidence. Daniel quietly joined him on the sidewalk. "They will never know it was you." Ethan smiled faintly without taking his eyes from the joyful scene beyond the glass. "They do not need to know my name," he said softly. "It is enough that they keep singing." Nearly 3 months passed before Jasmine Brooks learned that the future she had feared losing had quietly become stronger than she had ever imagined. The Jefferson Community Center welcomed more children every week. The music classrooms echoed with fresh voices, and instruments that once existed only in dreams now filled every lesson with possibility. Parents often asked the director who had made such extraordinary generosity possible, but the answer never changed. An anonymous foundation believed every child deserved the chance to discover music. Jasmine accepted that explanation with peaceful gratitude. She had never been interested in names attached to kindness. She believed the gift itself mattered far more than the person who delivered it. One crisp Saturday afternoon, the community center organized its first neighborhood appreciation concert inside the newly renovated auditorium. Families filled every seat while children proudly carried polished violins, guitars, and music folders they never imagined owning. Jasmine stood backstage listening to the cheerful excitement surrounding her. Oliver rested quietly beside her feet while young students practiced scales one last time. Before the concert began, the director approached her carrying a small envelope. "This arrived without a return address," she said. Jasmine smiled. "Would you read it to me?" The director carefully unfolded the single handwritten page. "To every teacher who reminds others they are worth hearing, thank you for proving that the greatest voices are the ones that lift someone else. Please continue believing in people before they believe in themselves." There was no signature. Jasmine lowered her head thoughtfully. "Whoever wrote that understands music." As the applause welcomed the performers onto the stage, Ethan Kong quietly entered through a side door near the back of the auditorium. He wore the same simple gray sweater Jasmine had seen weeks before, blending naturally among neighbors who never recognized him. Daniel Cho took a seat beside him without speaking. The lights dimmed, and one by one the children performed with joyful confidence. Some made small mistakes. Others forgot a lyric before smiling and continuing exactly as Jasmine had taught them. No one laughed. Everyone applauded. Finally, Jasmine stepped onto the stage holding her guitar. She thanked every volunteer, every parent, every child, and every unseen supporter whose kindness had given the program a new beginning. Then she paused. "There is one person here today," she said softly, or perhaps listening from somewhere else, "who chose to help without asking for recognition. I cannot see you, and perhaps I never will. But I hope you know something important. Because of your kindness, children who once doubted themselves are singing louder today than they did yesterday. That is a beautiful legacy." Ethan lowered his eyes, deeply moved by words never intended to find him. Jasmine began singing a gentle melody that filled every corner of the auditorium with warmth and quiet hope. When the final note faded, the audience rose together in a long-standing ovation. Ethan remained where he was for a brief moment before quietly stepping toward the exit. As he reached the doorway, Jasmine unexpectedly turned her face in his direction. She smiled, as though recognizing something beyond sight itself. "Thank you," she whispered into the microphone, not to anyone in particular, but somehow directly to him. Ethan smiled for the first time without restraint, placed one hand over his heart, and quietly walked into the evening air before the crowd could notice he had ever been there. Some people remembered the mysterious stranger who once stepped back instead of forward. Others remembered the blind singer whose kindness transformed every room she entered. But those who truly understood the story remembered something even greater. Respect is never demanded by power. It is quietly earned through humility, compassion, and the courage to see the worth of another human being. And on that unforgettable day, everyone discovered what dignity truly sounds like.